The biggest issues facing California right now. Important questions about the comeback after COVID, the economy, and the future of the Golden State. From the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in Yorba Linda, this is the California Recall Debate. Now, here are Christine Devine and Alex Michelson.
And good evening. Welcome to the California Recall Debate. We are live at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda.
And we are live right now on Fox 11 in Los Angeles, KTVU, Fox 2 in the Bay Area, and also the Salem Radio Network.
All right, come August 16th, every registered California voter, you'll be getting a ballot in the mail.
And that ballot has two questions on it. Number one, should Governor Newsom be recalled? And number two, if 50% of voters say yes, who should replace him?
Well, these four candidates, they want that job. So let's now go to our moderator. Tonight is Hugh Hewitt, Salem Radio host and CEO of the Nixon Foundation. Hugh.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome everyone watching and listening tonight. As Christine said, I'm the president of the Nixon Foundation. Joining Alex, Christine, and me in asking questions tonight is Ambassador Robert O'Brien, former National Security Advisor to the President and co-chair of the Nixon Seminar. The Nixon Foundation sent 7 invitations to the debate tonight. Governor Newsom, Larry Elder, and Caitlyn Jenner declined to attend, but accepting and with us tonight are the 2018 GOP Republican nominee for governor, John Cox, two-term mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer, currently serving assemblyman from the Sacramento area, Kevin Kiley, and former Congressman Doug Osee, who also represented the Sacramento area. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming tonight. The rules of the debate are very simple. I've discussed them with each of the candidates, and they have agreed to them. Questions are 30 seconds in length. Answers are 75 seconds in length. There will be a bell at 75 seconds, and they've all agreed to stop talking. They've also agreed not to interrupt each other. There is no right of reply. If they hear their name mentioned, they just have to hold their fire until it is their turn. Each questioner on our panelist side can ask either one question of all four or a separate question of each of the candidates. There'll be as many rounds as time permits, and we begin with Alex Michelson, California's preeminent political reporter. Alex?
Thank you very much, Hugh. That's very kind. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. This question is going to be for all of you, and we're going to go in alphabetical order, starting with you, Mr. Cox. If you become governor, you are going to face a Democratic supermajority in the Assembly and the Senate. They could override any veto that you have. You're going to face a lot of interest groups that are not going to want you in there and think they can wait you out for a year and then get a Democratic governor in November. Given all of those constraints, what specifically, tangibly, can you get done as governor, and what is priority one to actually get done?
Thank you, Alex, for that question. The first thing that I do as the governor of this state is I call a special session to address housing. The housing crisis is the most severe problem. We have a lot of them, but housing really is the most severe because it's driving businesses out of the state, it's driving people out of the state. Housing is my business. I build houses in other states for a tiny fraction of what it costs to do in California. And the problem is government. It's government mandates, it's government lawsuits occasioned by the California Environmental Quality Act. It's all the delays, it's all the approval processes. I can get approvals in Indiana in 6 to 12 months. It takes 12 years. And the problem with the cost of housing is it drives the middle class into poverty and out of this state. And it also drives up the cost of everything else. Think about it. It's a wage price spiral upwards. I'm a CPA, I'm a businessman. I understand what families are going through, and we need to tackle housing. I'm also going to tackle the other problems in this legislature. I'm going to try to do it with the legislators' help, but if I don't get that help, I'm going to go into the districts and try to get people elected who will fix the problems of this state.
Now to you, Mayor Faulconer, what can you tangibly get done, especially with a legislature that probably isn't going to want to work with you?
Alex, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to the Nixon Foundation, a new majority. I would just say at the outset, first and foremost, I'm excited. I'm excited because this recall is happening and Californians are ready to make a change at the top. And I'm ready to bring California together to champion the reforms and the changes that this state so desperately needs. Standing up for public safety and making our neighborhoods safer. removing 10 encampments from our sidewalks, and making California more affordable. I'm looking forward to bringing our state together after a very difficult time to do that. And I have experience doing that. I did that as mayor of San Diego after a very difficult time in our city's history. I'm going to take that exact same approach. And I have experience in working with a majority Democrat legislature because I did it my entire tenure as mayor of San Diego. What do? You go out and you win the argument publicly. And then when you win the argument, you can get the vote. And I'm going to focus first and foremost on making California affordable. I put forward the largest tax cut in California history for our middle class because we need it, because our state's too expensive and Californians are leaving and voting with their feet. So if you believe like I do that it's time to make California more affordable, we can do it.
Assemblyman, you're in the Assembly. You know how challenging it is to get Republican legislation through right now. What can you specifically actually make happen?
That's right, and I have authored some of the most groundbreaking legislation to pass in recent years on topics like school choice, public safety, criminal justice reform, artificial intelligence. But what I've also seen in my 5 years in the legislature is that our state government is fundamentally broken. That's why our quality of life is declining in California. And what's broken it is we have a political class that serves special interests rather than serving the people of California. And I have not been able to fix our broken state government as one member of the legislature, and I wouldn't be able to do it on my own as governor, but I would be able to start doing it on day one with the mandate for fundamental change that this recall would provide. So the question you ask is the right one, because whoever wins this race is going to have 1 year to offer a viable alternative and set our state on a new course before the next election. So I'd say, first of all, the era of corruption is over. I've already taken a step in this direction by becoming the first elected official in California not to accept any funding from such special interests. Second, I strategically use executive authority to unwind harmful policies, such as by finally terminating the state of emergency and making sure that every California school is open full time. But yes, to truly get fundamental change, you need to work with the legislature. And having spent 5 years in the legislature, I know that the one thing legislators respond to is political pressure, the fear of losing their job. And having just seen the governor lose his job, there will be a unique opportunity to bring fundamental reforms on issues like the cost of living, rising crime rates, and school choice.
Congressman Ossie, what is something tangible and specific that you can actually get done?
So the governor's got immense authorities within the agencies and departments of the state. First thing I'm going to do is I'm firing the guy that's preventing the construction of new water storage. Then I'm firing the guy that is trying to release, through regulatory changes, the prisoners who have been righteously convicted and have not yet served their terms. The State Board of Education, the governor has a number of appointees on there. That group controls the curriculum that is presented in our classrooms. I'm replacing the people that are there who are giving us all these foolish things that our kids don't need. We're going to focus on reading by the 3rd grade, history by the 6th, math by the 8th, and civics by the time they get out of high school. The governor also has immense authority in terms of the appointments to the PUC. I'm replacing the people who have given us power at 70 to 80% more than what our neighbors in Nevada or Arizona or elsewhere are paying. We're going to get back to addressing fundamental things that make a difference around the kitchen table.
Thank you very much. To my colleague now, Christine Devine.
Let's talk about the coronavirus. It is the issue of our time. The Delta variant is surging. I'm going to start with you, Mayor Faulconer. Republican governors in states like Florida and Arizona have signed bills banning a mask mandate in schools. Where do you stand on a mask in schools? And would you allow for local control for districts who have their own numbers that they're concerned about to deal with this themselves?
Well, first and foremost, I urge everyone to get vaccinated. Vaccinations is how we get our way out of this. I'm vaccinated, my family is vaccinated. And if we don't want to be dealing this with our kids and our grandchildren, we have to take action now. I want our schools fully reopened. I want our kids back in school. I want our teachers back in school. But I do not favor mandates. I favor educate. You're not going to mandate your way out of the coronavirus. I think people in California want to do the right thing. And for those that are still hesitant, we got to continue to provide that education, continue to show the benefits of what happens when you do get vaccinated. And so I believe that is absolutely the right way to go. Education first, not mandates.
Would you ban a mask mandate in schools?
I do not support a mask mandate in schools.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go now to Mr. Cox. My question for you is, Governor Newsom issued a mandate for state employees and healthcare workers to show proof they've been vaccinated or take a weekly COVID test. Would you uphold that?
No, I don't believe we should do that. First of all, there's a lot of people that have had COVID and have antibodies. They don't need the vaccine. They shouldn't get the vaccine. This disease is an awful one. I had it very early on, and it's not something you want to have, but it's 99.9% survivable by people who are in decent health, who aren't elderly. What we need to do is look at what other states have done. I mean, I compare California to Florida. I have two nephews that live in Orlando. They were able to go to school the whole time in front of a teacher. Kids in California were not given that privilege by Governor Newsom. Governor Newsom closed so many small businesses. I'm a small businessman. The big businesses were fine. Costco and Home Depot had just a good time, but small businesses were crushed. I don't think we should do mandates. I think the governor's COVID management was an absolute disaster. It resulted in far more danger and far more problems. He got slapped down in court, too, for closing the churches. Strip clubs and pot shops were deemed essential. I think it's really a problem when politicians and governments get involved in deciding what's essential and what's not.
All right, we do know that the coronavirus is unpredictable. So my question now is to Congressman Ossie. The CDC came out last week recommending masks indoors in hotspots, even if you're vaccinated. Would you adopt CDC guidelines? Several Republican governors, Texas, Nebraska, are not.
I think the government is engaged in a significant overreach of its authority in terms of imposing these things. I happen to have great faith in the ability of people to make decisions of their own, to assess the risk that they face, whether it be for their child in school or their workplace or where they shop. If you go to a store that says, please wear a mask, you have a decision to make. You can put on a mask and go in, or you have to respect the store owner's rights to control their own environment. I just think that government overreach has to stop. All right, this is not the last variant we're going to have. If we don't break this pattern of government overreach into our daily lives, then we're going to get stuck with this over and over and over. Let's have some faith in the people that are in our state or in our country. Now, my view here is that instead of giving people mandates, we need to give them options. Our legislature and our governor right now have said, you will do this, without giving people options. I'm for giving people options. Take your kid to a different school, shop somewhere else. I'm not in favor of a government overreach as defined by the CDC.
Thank you for your answer. Assemblyman Kiley, this is to you. 20 million Californians are fully vaccinated. That is 53% of our state's population. What would you do to get more people vaccinated, or do you believe personal choice, personal risk?
I believe in personal choice, and I should say that I have done everything as a member of the legislature to get information and access to my constituents. That is in stark contrast to Gavin Newsom. In October of last year, he cast doubt on the safety of the vaccine. He said we can't take the FDA's word for it. This drew a scathing rebuke from the chair of the United States Senate Health Committee, who said the governor needed to stop second-guessing the career scientists of the FDA. He said that Newsom was costing lives and discouraging Americans from taking the vaccine. And then when it came time to actually roll out the vaccine in December, California had the slowest rollout of any state. For a time, we were 50th out of 50 in actually administering our doses. I had asked Newsom to call a special session of the legislature so we could be there to help, but he refused. He said he was going to do it on his own, and he blew it. You had seniors who were told they were eligible, would spend all day on the phone trying to get an appointment and couldn't get one. And this was at the time when it mattered most, when COVID was at its peak, when hospitalizations were at their peak, when deaths were at their peak. We undoubtedly could have saved lives if we had had a better government performance. We certainly would have done a lot more good than the hoopla with these vaccine lotteries and these steps we're taking towards mandates and passports. It is a perfect case study for the perversity of California politics, using bright lights and cash giveaways and state control as a mirage for a broken state government that fails to serve California in the most basic ways.
We turn it now to the ambassador.
Thank you, Christine. And this is a question for all the candidates, with Assemblyman Kiley to begin. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, reports that cartels from Mexico, South and Central America are the biggest drug threat to the United States. There's an avalanche of cocaine and deadly fentanyl that's coming into this country, And unfortunately, the DEA says that California is at the epicenter of the cartel's malign activity here in our state. There are parents today outside of this library in the parking lot who've lost children to fentanyl, and they're protesting and asking for relief from Sacramento. If elected governor, what would you do to stop this avalanche of drugs and stop the cartels from coming into our states? Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's a very important question. And I was just at an event for parents in my own district whose son tragically died of fentanyl late last year, who would have been a senior, would have just graduated from Whitney High School in Rockland. And this is an issue that is affecting more and more families throughout the state. So public awareness is a very big part of it. Obviously, a lot of the issues at the border exist on the federal level, but there are things that we can do at the state level as well. For example, laws like the sanctuary state absolutely need to be rolled back, which have gotten in the way of our law enforcement in order to keep folks who are dangerous to our communities out and to actually enforce the law and keep our communities safe. I'll also note that California has made changes to our drug laws that have been entirely counterproductive. I was a prosecutor before I ran for office. I was a deputy attorney general for the state, and I saw right before I ran in 2016 that recent changes to our criminal law were having a devastating impact on the safety of our communities. It's taken Gavin Newsom 5 years now with a pending recall to finally realize there is a problem and say that he's tough on crime. Prop 47, to take one example, has made it so you can't charge someone with a felony for even using Class A drugs. That's why we have open drug use on our streets. It's also why prosecutors no longer have the leverage to actually force offenders into drug treatment, so they're not given the tools they need in order to turn their lives around. It's a lose-lose. It hurts public safety and it hurts the offenders themselves, and we make far too many of those lose-lose choices in California.
Congressman Ossie, what's your plan to take on the drug cartels and the gangs who are pushing fentanyl and cocaine to our kids?
So one of the things that I bring to the table here is 23 years of experience following this issue. When I went to Congress, I didn't want to go on appropriations. I didn't want to go on Ways and Means. I wanted to go on the Drug Policy Subcommittee because that's who controls U.S. policy dealing with this situation. So this is not new to me. We are being overwhelmed by the illegal importation of all sorts of drugs. We are being overwhelmed by the production of these same drugs in our rural areas. We cannot try to solve this problem by lessening our attention to it. We have to increase funding at the state and federal level to those agencies that are charged with interdicting this flow of drugs. We have to set up a much more serious inspection regime at the border. We have to give our law enforcement people the antidotes for immediate application when they find somebody in the street who's suffering from fentanyl overdose or methamphetamines or what have you. And we must find a way to provide treatment for those who are suffering from drug addiction.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, why is Sacramento getting this so wrong for California families right now? How would you fix it?
Because Sacramento is all about politicians who talk, and they don't do anything. I've been a businessman for 40 years. I have to solve problems. If I don't solve problems, I'm out of business. And this issue about the drugs coming across our borders, and I might also add the human trafficking as well as the guns, is personal to me. I have a 16-year-old daughter. Last night, I was at her high school in an all-parent seminar talking about the incidence of drugs in her wonderful school. It affects everybody in every neighborhood. And if you don't think so, I hope you never have to find out. We need to stop the dithering. We need to solve this problem, as I think only a businessman would. Go right to the heart of it. We first of all need to end the sanctuary state nonsense in the state. We need to have the local police able to interface with ICE as well as the Border Patrol. We absolutely need to build a wall along our southern border all the way. It's there in parts in San Diego, but it's got to be all the way across this border. We don't have these problems in Canada because they can enforce their law and they're not corrupt. But unfortunately, we have problems with our neighbor to the south. They can't run their country and interdict this stuff, and we got to make sure that we protect our children at all costs.
Thank you, Mayor. You confronted this issue head on in San Diego. What's the first step you take as governor?
As governor, I'm going to put victims first, and I'm going to put criminals in jail, as succinctly as I can put it. And the fact that we have a governor, ladies and gentlemen, that has enabled the defund the police movement, the fact that we have a governor that has supported lessening penalties in our criminal justice system, and we've seen, Ambassador, as you said, the results on the street. He changed from doing heroin and methamphetamine from a felony down to a misdemeanor when he supported Prop 47. And guess what else we're seeing? And I was in San Francisco just last week in front of a closed Walgreens. Why was that Walgreens closed along with 13 others? Because of rising crime. And that means that in those neighborhoods where those Walgreens were, those families can't get the groceries that they may have depended on, or our seniors can't get the medications that they wanted. I will take a very strong and firm approach because I've seen the disasters of these policies on the streets throughout this great state of ours. It's time to have a governor who is going to put victims first. And that will be a dramatically different approach than we're seeing in Sacramento today.
Thank you, Ambassador. I want to ask you all about critical race theory. It has embroiled the California Education Board in controversy for 4 years as they struggle to define ethnic studies. Divided communities, it's outraged parents over indoctrination of their children. It's divided teachers from school administrations and teachers from parents and children from education. What is CRT? Is it a real issue for the California public schools? And if so, what has Gavin Newsom done wrong about it? And what would you do right about it? You alluded to it first, so I'll bring it back to you, Congressman Ossie. What would you do on your first day as governor?
So the curriculum that's offered in our K-12 schools is dictated by the State Board of Education, on which the governor has multiple appointees. And then the school districts all have to comply with the options that come out of there. Each of those options today require a district to offer CRT, as it's known, in one form or another. I think it's very important to note that CRT is anti-merit, anti-objectivity, and anti-achievement. It introduces a totally different set of standards for measuring success. Those standards serve at cross purposes to undermine what we need to teach our children, all right? Our children need to learn to read by the 3rd grade. They don't need to be given an excuse as to why they haven't learned to read by the 3rd grade. Our children need to learn math and civics by the 8th and the 12th grade. They need to not be given excuses that they can use to avoid responsibility for not learning that. I am opposed to CRT. It is anti-merit, anti-objective, and anti-achievement.
Thank you, Congressman. Mayor Faulconer, if it's real, what has Gavin Newsom done wrong, and why should he be held accountable for these controversies?
Well, CRT has absolutely no place in our public school system, period. It's divisive. Focuses on what divides us rather than what unites us as a country. That's why it's wrong, and that's why, again, we need to absolutely stand up for that. And the fact, we have to be very clear, the United States is not a racist country. Let me say that again, the U.S. is not a racist country. The more folks that stand up and speak truth to that, I think the better off we're going to be. Because what CRT also leads to is cancel culture. I stood up against cancel culture. In fact, I stood outside Abraham Lincoln High School in San Francisco several months ago, where the school board up there wanted to remove the name Abraham Lincoln from the high school. And I stood up and I said, well, wait a second. What are we doing here? Instead of trying to get the kids back into school where they belong to get a good quality education, this school board was saying we're going to spend all our time trying to remove the name of Abraham Lincoln. We stood up to cancel culture. And guess what? 2 days later, they changed their mind. That's the type of pressure that I will bring. That's the kind of resolve I will bring as governor, to stand up for the courage of our convictions. Don't put yourself in front of just say what the woke crowd wants to do or the politically correct crowd.
Mr. Cox, what role does a governor have, though, in local education decisions, or does Gavin Newsom have a leadership role that he has not executed?
He has a leadership role, and he hasn't been exercising it. And the state spends $100 billion a year on education, and that gives them a lot of power. Hey, listen, the real problem here is the introduction of politics in our education system. I am an absolute advocate for giving the parents the power of education. Let's put every dollar we spend into a backpack and give it to each child and give the parents the power. The parents learned during the management of this pandemic who has the real power in the public schools, and that's the teachers' union's bosses. Not necessarily the teachers, the union bosses. CRT and all the other things that go along with it, and ethnic studies and all these things, are just a symptom of the politicization of our schools. My mom was a teacher in the public schools. I was a school board president. I've been a teacher. I understand what it takes to teach. And we've put politics too much. We need to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. I toured Folsom Prison, and most of those inmates were from LA, and they had high school diplomas but couldn't read past a 3rd grade level. That's criminal, and that's what we're doing with our children and our future. We have got to stop that, get the politicians out of the school system.
Assemblyman Kiley.
Well, the governor will make a decision if this bill passes the legislature on whether to sign or veto a bill to mandate the teaching of CRT, or as it's being called, ethnic studies, in every single high school as a graduation requirement, and I would certainly veto that bill. I spoke against it on the floor of the Assembly. But what's important to note is that just 2 years ago, Gavin Newsom was against this too. When the first edition of this curriculum came out, it was universally condemned. Newsom himself said it was offensive in so many ways, and it would never see the light of day. The California Legislative Jewish Caucus wrote a letter saying that the curriculum echoed the propaganda of the Nazi regime. We should have scrapped the whole thing then, but instead they made a few edits and are now seeking to impose it on every high school student in California. But I think the important point of CRT is that it's exposed a vacuum in our public education system. We don't truly teach civics in our schools anymore, at least not like we used to. Civics used to not just be some add-on to the curriculum, but it was the unifying thread of your education to empower you to prepare for citizenship, to be a productive member of society, to learn about the things that make America great and our founding principles. But we don't teach education, we don't think about education that way anymore. And so CRT has come along and is exploiting that vacuum. If we're no longer going to teach our kids how to build their communities up, then we'll teach them how to tear their communities down. So I think we need to defeat this CRT bill, but we ultimately need to reimpose a sort of a real civic education in our schools.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Before we begin round two, I remind the audience that has joined us either on the radio or television since the beginning of the debate that your ballot will arrive next week. There are 2 questions, yes or no, should Gavin Newsom remain in office? And then if he is removed from office, who should replace him? Would it be one of these 4 people? Round 2 begins with Alex Michelson.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about the issue of homelessness, which a lot of polls show is the most important issue to people. Congressman Ossie, on our statewide political show, The Issue Is, last week, you referred to Mayor Faulkner as a plastic man and said that his plan when it comes to homelessness is disingenuous. Mayor, we'll give you the opportunity to respond in a moment, but first to you, Congressman, what do you mean by plastic man, and what specifically would you do differently when it comes to homelessness?
So the facts of what's happened in San Diego is that in 2017, the administration there changed the methodology by which they counted homeless and excluded people living in their cars or their RVs. Number went down. The city police department has been engaged in rousting homeless, the net result of which is that people have been moved out of San Diego into the satellite cities around San Diego, reducing numbers in San Diego, but not reducing overall numbers. These are not answers. Hotels for homeless, not an answer. All it does is take somebody who's dying on the street and put them in a hotel room where they can die. You cannot advocate hotels for homeless without also mandatorily requiring treatment for the underlying drug illness or mental illness. That's what I mean by plastic. It doesn't hold up to examination.
So how do you actually get that through your plan?
You change the law known as Lanham and Petrus from the standard which says someone can be taken into custody if they're an imminent threat to themselves or others, and you can compel treatment. You change that standard from imminent threat to someone who's unable to conduct their affairs self-sufficiently if they're drug addicted or mentally ill, and then you get them the treatment they need.
Mayor Faulkner, your response to being called plastic man, him saying you're kind of playing with the margins to change up the reality.
Yeah, I think it's important to get to the facts, Alex, on particularly this issue, which is so incredibly important. The fact that it was proud in San Diego that we reduced homelessness by double digits, the only city, big city in California to do that. And yes, with the same methodology that every other city was using. And in fact, not only did it go down in San Diego, it went down in the county as well. Why? Because I took aggressive, firm action. I did not allow 10 encampments on the streets when I was mayor of San Diego. Got a lot of attack at first, but when people saw the difference, when people saw that we were helping people and getting them into the shelters, it made a dramatic from what was opposed to support. Because I strongly believe that if we allow 10 encampments on the sidewalks, people are going to die on the sidewalks. And we're better than that. And so we set a very strong point of view in San Diego, as I said, not only reduced it, but made a real difference in the quality of life of our city. And I felt so strongly about that I created a new division within the San Diego Police Department called the Neighborhood Policing Division. That became the #1 referral source to get folks off the streets and into the shelter system that we had set up. I am going to lead by example as governor and take that exact same firm approach.
Mr. Cox, I know you sometimes have been critical of Mayor Faulkner as well. When you've talked about homeless, though, some of your words have been lost a little bit because you've traveled the state with a bear and traveled the state with a giant 8-foot thing of trash. And what do you say to critics who say some of those gimmicks are getting in the way of the serious message and the serious discussion?
No, this is a serious issue, and that's why I did it, to draw attention to it, and it got a lot of attention. And let me tell you, this issue, I was just in San Diego. This issue illustrates the impotence of the career politicians that we have in leadership in this state, all across the state. I was in San Diego last week, and I drove down Imperial Boulevard, tents all over the place, people living on the street all over San Diego. And it's that way in Chico, it's that way in San Francisco, Los Angeles, everywhere. I proposed a specific set of goals, and they revolve around treatment. I'm a businessman. I need to solve the problem, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to, if we have to, we're going to force people to get into treatment. We're not just going to buy hotels. The city attorney in San Diego just sued, by the way, to avoid a couple of hotel deals where excessive prices were paid for hotels in San Diego. We have got to stop wasting money on this. We've got to do the smart thing, and that is get people in treatment, get conservatorships if we need to. Britney Spears didn't need a conservator. A lot of the people living on the streets do. And we've got to make sure that we build lower-cost housing. I can't emphasize enough, that's the #1 issue that I'm going to address, and we have to make sure people can afford a place to live.
Assemblyman Kiley, a lot of what Mr. Cox is talking about cannot be done unilaterally by the governor. It requires a changing of the laws. I know when you were on the issue, you said you wanted to call a special session of the legislature, bring them all back and deal with issues like homelessness. What specifically would you want to see in terms of the budget? And if the legislature say, no, we're not going to work with you, what do you do?
Well, it's the governor himself who has gotten in the way of a lot of cases. And I should say at the outset that, homelessness in California is a human tragedy and a national disgrace. We have more wealth in this state than all but 5 countries, and yet we have thousands of people dying on our streets. So I decided to do an audit of all the homelessness spending in California because we keep spending more and more, and the problem keeps getting worse and worse. We have 9 times the unsheltered homeless population as the next closest state. My audit would have looked at where all the spending is going and why isn't it solving the problem. It got unanimous support on the Senate side of the audit committee, but the governor's administration testified against it, and we fell a single vote short on the assembly side. And so what's happened? We've simply continued spending more money, and the problems only continue to get worse. The nonpartisan legislative analyst said more spending will quickly dissipate because there is no strategy. The governor's own mental health czar, his top mental health advisor, said in an interview in March that homelessness in California is not a money problem, it's a leadership problem. So what would I do? I would bring a new strategy, and I would bring new leadership. Under the 9th Circuit decision, you can't ask people to move along and get off the streets if there's a place for them to go. So I'd make sure there's a shelter, there's a roof over their head, there's a place for them to go. But then I'd connect them with the needed services, substance abuse treatment, mental health counseling, job training, you name it. This isn't brain surgery. We can look at what's worked in other states, and we can do it here.
All right, thank you very much. Now to my co-anchor, Christine.
So we reached out to our voters, asked them to send us questions. We had way too many questions for the amount of time. So what we're going to do is just toss each of you a different question just to get to know you a little bit better. So we'll start with you, Congressman Ossie. It's about EDD fraud. Bruce Awashi asks, how do you clean up the EDD mess? Perhaps $30 billion in fraudulent unemployment claims in these COVID times. Others say it takes them days to get on the phone to get help to get their checks. How do you correct things?
So Elaine Howell did a report on EDD. It was routinely ignored by the governor. So this really does lay right at Governor Newsom's feet. I doubt if he's even read the report. 114 pages filled with recommendations. This is not rocket science. Every large and small business in the state of California has measures in place to prevent inappropriate payouts for false invoices and the like. Every single large and small business in this state has a practice, if they're successful, of answering the phone in a timely manner. Those are the two critical pieces to this. Let's figure out, by going and looking at other entities that have large employee pools or large sales volumes, how do they prevent fraud? And let's incorporate those measures into the EDD process. And secondarily, just answer the damn phone, all right? Just answer the damn phone.
That's a soundbite right there. All right, thank you. Mayor Faulkner, the question for you is crime. We all know that shootings are up, homicides as well. Susan Nelson asks about Prop 47. It changed a number of felonies to misdemeanors, basically theft under $950 to a misdemeanor. Voters approved that, though, in 2014. So what would you do about crime?
We're ready to overturn that. Every California family deserves to be safe, to feel safe, and to have a safe neighborhood. That is not the reality under Gavin Newsom's California. As you rightfully point out, crime right now, violent crime is at a 13-year high. Murders are up 30%. And yet we have a governor who doesn't seem to think that it's a problem. Won't talk about it. We have a governor who comes out and supports defunding the police movement. I stood up to the defund the police movement. I had hundreds of protesters out in front of my house this past summer, yelling at me, yelling at my family, every name in the book. Defund the police. I said no. I said the longer that they were out there, it would only strengthen my resolve to do the right thing. I didn't defund the police budget in San Diego, I increased it. I increased it because if we want safe neighborhoods, if we want the best and brightest men and women who wear that badge, protecting us day and night, we better darn well give them the tools, the training, and the support to be successful. That's the approach that I will take as governor, and work to strengthen those laws that this governor has worked to weaken. He's wrong. Californians know he's wrong. That's why he's going to get recalled.
All right, thank you. This is to Assemblyman Kiley. The question is about immigration. Carmen Perez would like to know your policy on the border and immigration. And another question came in, would you send the National Guard to our border, our southern border?
Well, we're obviously seeing huge problems at the border, and there's only so much you can do at the state level, but I would do what I could to try to assuage the situation and try to staunch the flow of folks over here, because it's become untenable in a lot of ways. But I should also point out that there's a lot of things that have been done at the state level using state policy that have been unhelpful. The sanctuary state is a prime example of that. This passed in 2017 and limited the ability of folks, of law enforcement, to coordinate with federal immigration authorities. And it was a law that only applied to those who had both come into the country illegally and had been, convicted of a criminal offense, and so, or at least arrested for one. And so I would seek to undo policies like that that have served to put California in the wrong position vis-a-vis the federal government when it comes to immigration. I also think that we have done way too much in terms of expanding benefits that almost no other state has done. For example, in this last budget, there were unprecedented benefits, Medicaid, given to undocumented immigrants in California. This was a $267 billion budget, by the way, which is the largest in state history, and includes, record levels of funding in a variety of ways, but does very little to actually get our state moving in the right direction and get us the economic recovery that we need.
All right, we thank you for your time. The question now, Mr. Cox, is to you. It is a business question. Support for small business. Nick Patronite writes, I work as a manager. Due to unemployment assistance in COVID times, we're struggling to find employees for our warehouse. How do you get people back to work?
Small business is the engine of growth for not only California, but the entire country. And right now, we're supporting a lot of people, which is great for people who can't afford their life in this state, which we've got to reduce the cost of living, but we've got to correct the problem. We've got to give people opportunity. Just to start a new business in California now, it takes 6 to 12 months to get the paperwork done. And then you've got all kinds of problems with bureaucracy and regulations. We've got to cut through all of that. What I'm going to do as governor is zero-based budgeting and a transparency agenda, which means we're going to shine the light on every single regulation in California that limits the ability of people to start their own business. The licensing rules and the regulations are geared towards protecting existing business, but not letting people get into business. And we penalize people tremendously. We also need to reduce the tax burden. I'm going to be announcing a 25% across-the-board tax rate cut for every Californian, the largest tax cut in the history of this state, because this state taxes people too much and regulates people to death. I'm a businessman. I would never even think of starting a business in California.
Ambassador O'Brien, we turn it to you.
Thank you, Christine. This question is related to Nick's question, and it's for all the candidates. We'll start with Congressman Ossie. At a time that the U.S. manufacturing base is starting to return home from overseas to California or to the United States because of COVID, but also because of the Buy American initiatives of the Biden and the Trump administrations, we're seeing thousands of California businesses leave the state, and those include household names like HP and Oracle and Palantir, McKesson, Charles Schwab. Even Elon Musk is spending more time in Texas now than in California. So the question I have for you, Congressman, and the other candidates is, how would you encourage companies that are reshoring, that are coming back from overseas and they want to bring the supply chains home to America, to come locate in California? And how do we keep the companies that are already here from leaving to go to other states? Thank you.
So Newsom and his minions think that everybody's going to stay here because they're in charge. The empirical evidence is exactly the opposite. They're leaving because they're in charge. Let me tell you what I'd do specifically. Business wants to open, we need to reduce the LLC filing fees that they have to pay to the franchise tax board. Business wants to hook up to utilities. We need to stop the excessive charges for connecting to utilities. Business wants to hire independent contractors to do this or that or the other thing because they don't want or they don't have the volume to take them on full-time as employees. We need to rescind AB 5 and make independent contracting available to these companies. These are simple things we can do along the way. I want to go back to something on the audit question of EDD, because one of the things we're dealing with at EDD is that they continue to pay out money to people who rightly should be back at work. We need to stop paying people to stay home. We need those people back at work. There's two parts to this question. The first part dealt with the companies. The second part deals with getting people to work there.
Thank you. Assemblyman Kiley, we've got a legislature that hasn't done some of these basic things that the congressman just outlined. How do we get the legislature to work with you as governor to make California more attractive, A, for businesses to move into California, and B, to keep them from leaving?
Well, I'll say, first of all, that a lot of the damage isn't actually done by the legislature. The legislature has delegated an enormous amount of power to California state agencies, and that's where a lot of the damage is done. They churn out regulation after regulation and entangle themselves more and more in our lives every year. And so as governor, you could bring new leadership. You could give all of these state agencies, CARB, the Water Board, the EDD, the Department of Public Health, a new directive to actually serve the people of California. Don't harass them or harangue them or try to run their lives like a lot of them do. But ultimately, in order to have sweeping change, and so yes, I would try to roll back those regulations and would do so using executive authority. But to have more sweeping change, you need to get the legislature to act. And the thing about the problem that you've cited is you hear a lot of these examples about Elon Musk and HP and the big companies, but actually the arrangement works out pretty well for big companies who have wide margins in a lot of cases, who have compliance departments who can tell them how to follow the law, who have lawyers on staff who can help them reduce litigation risks. It's small businesses who ultimately pay the price, and we saw that more than ever during the COVID shutdown. As powerful industries like Hollywood were exempted from the lockdowns, while small businesses die in droves. So I would immediately work on things like rolling back PAGA, which is a huge impediment, is a huge litigation risk for businesses, certainly repealing AB 5, and doing a systematic review of every regulation that needlessly makes it so difficult to do business in California.
Mayor, how were you able to keep businesses from leaving San Diego, and what would you do as governor?
Look, you're right. People are leaving California. They're voting with their feet. You name the state that they're going to. Let me ask the audience a question. Raise your hand if you know somebody who's thinking of leaving California. I'm not surprised to see that. That's the reality. And the reality is that we have a governor who doesn't seem to think that it's a problem, because people are voting with their feet. And for the first time, we lost population last year. We lost a congressional seat, of course, because of these terrible policies. And so rather than helping to make it easier to start a business or to make it more affordable for a family to actually stay, live, and retire in California, we have a governor and a legislature whose sole solution for virtually any problem is they want to raise taxes and send more money to Sacramento. Voters said no. this past cycle when they came out with the largest commercial property tax increase in the history of California. And the reason the Californians said no is because we've gotten to that point that says enough's enough. You can't keep putting the burden on small businesses. It's crushing our families. It's crushing so many entrepreneurs that we are so proud of here in California. So I will have a vastly different approach to support our businesses, stand up for doing the right thing, not moving forward with any of the tax increases that this governor and legislature continue to want to foist on California.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, you're a successful businessman. What would you do in your first year as governor, or the year that you've got left in the term as governor, to change the situation and change it quickly?
Well, this is the problem in California. We got businesses leaving left and right. It's because we put career politicians, celebrity, and insiders in control of the state. A lot of states around the country, red and blue, have elected businessmen and women as their governors, and they're the most popular governors in the country because they focus on the problem and they focus on solutions. So what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to fix the housing crisis in the state. A lot of businesses have told me they're leaving because their employees can't afford to live in this state, and it drives up their costs and it drives up their salaries. We're going to cut taxes, as I just talked about. We're also going to talk about changing our legal system. The loser pays. Texas has done that, and Texas is getting a whole lot of our businesses every single day. We've also got to make sure that we deliver water and electricity. I've talked to businesses that rely on electricity. They tell me they're paying 2, 3, 4 times what their subsidiaries pay in other states. They will not keep doing that forever. We need to cut the cost of electricity. We need to get more sources. We also need to make sure that we have water. The agricultural industry is important to the state, but we also have to make sure that people can afford the water in this state. We're going to have rationing next year, and it's wrong because we're sitting next to the largest body of water in America, in the world.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm going to turn to that subject, water. The North Coast is already parched by drought. Drought has returned to many parts of California. And just yesterday, the State Water Resources Control Board issued an emergency curtailment authorized by Governor Newsom that will devastate the Central Valley, the farmers, and the hundreds of thousands of people who work for them. I'll start with you, Mayor Faulconer. On day one, what will you do about the water cutoffs in the Central Valley that is causing, for the second time in a decade, devastation to the agricultural businesses?
Stop them, because agriculture is so incredibly important to our state, our community. We're so proud of agriculture in California and the Central Valley. We are not only, Central Valley is not just the breadbasket for California, we're the breadbasket for the nation. That's a truism. And yet we have a governor that has not done a thing to increase water supply in California. I was in Fresno just last week talking with our farmers who are seeing all of their allocations cut to virtually zero. We need to increase our supply. Specifically, we must move forward on projects that are already on the books, but this governor and legislature won't do it. Why he won't do it? Because he's letting the far left environmentalists stop him from doing it. What am I specifically talking about? I'm talking about Sites Reservoir and Temperance Flat. Those are two big things that we need to do for our Central Valley farmers. They deserve a governor that's not going to ignore the Central Valley. They deserve a governor that understands how important water, resources, and new supplies are. We did some of that in San Diego, where we did one of the largest water recycling in California. I'm proud of that. You've got to put your elbow into it. We've got to increase our supply. If we don't, why do we expect anything to be different year after year when we have drought conditions? We have to have a governor that's going to stand up for farmers.
Mr. Cox, what will you do about the emergency curtailment order yesterday for the Central Valley farmers and the, again, hundreds of thousands of people who work for them?
I would countermand it, and I'd immediately talk about getting us more water. Again, this is the politicians and celebrities, insiders that we've had running this state into the ground. We're sitting next to the largest body of water in the world, the Pacific Ocean. Israel has turned a desert into an agricultural paradise. And why? Because they've done desalination, and they've done it at a fraction of the cost of what we have done in California. We have underinvested. The California Water Project was a miracle. It turned this wonderful Central Valley into the fruit basket of the world. We produce 85% of the eating oranges. We have more dairy than Vermont and Wisconsin combined. We have more cattle than Texas. We need to make sure that we have water for the future, as well as for the people that are here. We need water every single day. It's the staff of life. So we have terrifically underinvested. And why? Because we've listened to the insiders. I'm an outsider. I'm not a politician. I'm not beholden to these groups. I'm going to talk to the people of this state about common sense solutions, and that means desalination, that means building more storage, that means building more recycling. That does not mean cutting allocations to our farmers or our people.
Assemblyman Kiley, does the rest of the state even understand the agricultural devastation brought about either on the North Coast or in the Central Valley by water cutoffs?
Well, a lot of folks probably don't, see the immediate impact of it, but certainly will experience the ultimate impact of it because we rely on our farmers for our food supply. And so we absolutely cannot have them be the first to have to face rationing and cutbacks whenever we hit these dry spells. So, to answer your immediate question, yes, I would seek to roll that back in any way I could and to put our farmers as our first priority rather than always being our last priority. But yes, the long-term solution ultimately is to recognize that this is a political choice we have made. The governor's own agriculture secretary said that the reason for these cutbacks was Mother Nature and climate change. That is not true. The reason we're facing these cutbacks is because of political choices that we have made. Rationing and cutbacks and scarcity, those are political choices when we know full well that endemic to our climate are periods of wetness and dryness. We used to do things differently. We built the State Water Project back in the 1960s. The world hasn't seen anything like it. It was a marvel of engineering, but then we rested on our laurels, and we haven't expanded capacity in any significant way since. So I actually am authoring an Assembly constitutional amendment that will dedicate a fixed portion of the general fund every year to water storage projects. Temperance Flat, Sites Reservoir, there's a low-hanging fruit like raising the water level at San Luis and Shafta. We can have an affordable supply of water and one that is sustainable, and we can embrace abundance rather than scarcity.
Congressman Ossie, with apologies to Oklahoma, can the farmer and the environmentalist be friends? Can you actually serve both of those communities of interest when it comes to water and the Delta?
So there's one farmer in this race. One. That's me. My sisters and I raise 1,000 acres of rice. Water is not theoretical to me. All right? It's not theoretical. These fellas, they know the story. They don't know the reality. We need to increase supply. If we increase supply, it benefits not only farmers, but also cities and the environmental community. We need to increase supply by going back to the projects I first advocated for when I was in Congress in 1999, which is the Sites Reservoir. We need to build on that in Temperance Flat. We need to go beyond that, though. We need to go to the Modesto Irrigation District. We need to go to the Fresno Wastewater Treatment Plant. We need to go to the Sacramento Wastewater Treatment Plant. We need to go to every single wastewater treatment plant and figure out how to provide funding for them to pair up with farmers to process water to a sufficient cleanliness so that we can use it on our crops. This is not, again, this is not theoretical. If you're a farmer, these guys they all know the story. I live it, all right? I live this issue. I'm your guy if water's your issue.
Before we begin round three, I want to remind those viewers and listeners who have just joined us, we're at the Richard Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. It is the first California recall debate. Channel 11 is carrying it, Fox LA live, as is their sister affiliate in San Francisco and the Salem Radio Network. To Alex Michelson for round three. Alex?
Thank you so much, Hugh. And this is the California recall debate. This is not a Republican primary debate, even though we've got a bunch of Republicans on the stage. And if you look at polls right now, about 40 to 50% of California voters are undecided on who to pick on question number 2 on the ballot, which is who should replace Governor Newsom. We know Democrats can vote on that question, even if they vote to try to keep Governor Newsom. We know there's a lot of Democrats that are in favor of the recall, and so they're trying to figure out where do they go. There is not an establishment Democrat on the ballot. And so I want to ask some questions that are important to Democrats to get your take on them. And Assemblyman Kiley, let's start with you. If Senator Feinstein were to retire next year, you would be in charge of appointing her replacement. If you picked a Republican, the Republicans would get control of the United States Senate. There are a lot of Democrats who would say, she's a Democrat, Senator Padilla is a Democrat, they both won overwhelmingly, Joe Biden won this state by 30 points, she should be replaced by a Democrat. Isn't that the most fair thing, and can you commit that you would appoint a Democrat to that seat?
Well, actually, Alex, I hate to do this, but I have to reject the premise of your question. I wouldn't make an appointment at all. I would leave it up to the voters, which is exactly what I, asked Gavin Newsom to do when there was the vacancy in Kamala Harris's seat. He didn't do so. He appointed Alex Padilla, who had a very fraught history in his tenure as Secretary of State. And so the voters of California were deprived of choosing their state senator, one of the most important offices in the entire country. As a matter of fact, what the governor did was of questionable legality. I actually got a legal opinion from our legislative counsel's office saying that no, Gavin Newsom's appointee cannot be, or Gavin Newsom cannot serve the remainder of Kamala Harris's term. Before the term expires, there needs to be an elected senator. And so now it's almost like farce. There's a bill that's going through the state legislature, and what it's doing is you're going to have 2 elections for the same office on your ballot next year for a United States senator. There's going to be one election for who's going to serve the next 6-year term, and then there's another election for who's going to serve like the last month of the existing term. So this is all too typical of what happens in our state capitol, is we try to shut voters out in every way possible. And so here they solve the constitutional problem in the least democratic way imaginable. That's what ultimately this recall is about, is returning power to the people of California.
All right, very interesting. Mayor Faulkner, the Newsom campaign has repeatedly called this a Republican recall driven by Trump supporters. They fought to even get that language on the ballot.
They did.
I'm wondering, for you, we know that you supported President Trump in 2016 and 2020. After January 6, are you still a Trump supporter? Do you welcome his endorsement, and would you want him to come campaign for you?
Well, look, first and foremost, what happened on January 6th was abhorrent to our country. To have folks storm our Capitol, to attack our Capitol police officers, that was wrong in every way imaginable. We want to have those folks held accountable, and I think that's incredibly important. And I will tell you, Alex, when it comes, I think you hit the nail on the head, by the way. What Gavin Newsom wants to do is make this all about Republican or Donald Trump. What he doesn't want people to do is talk about his failed record and what's not happening here in California. And I've been very, very upfront about it's not about partisanship right now. It's about leadership. And it's about leadership of a governor who has failed to do the right things, and who won't actually take the stands because he's too afraid of the far left. And so what does he have to do now? All he has is not going to come out and defend his record in the recall. He's going to call it all kinds of names. But he's going to have senators from other states come up and say that this is a partisan issue. It's not. It's about bringing our state together. It's about a leader that understands you can't politicize every single thing like Gavin Newsom wants to do. He's not doing the job. It's time to have a governor that's going to do the job.
So are you a Trump supporter, though? You're saying he's afraid of the far left. Are you afraid of the far right?
I'm not afraid of anybody. I'm not afraid of anybody.
So what's the answer?
I'm proudly take the endorsement and support of any Republican, independent, or Democrat who wants to get rid of Gavin Newsom and make California a better state.
All right. Congressman Ossie, what do you see as the size of the California budget if you're in charge in an ideal world? And who are 2 or 3 California Democratic legislators you think you could work with to make that happen?
So I want to answer, I'm going to get to that. But on January 6th, I didn't wait until April or May to make clear my position on what happened January 6th. I'm on record that afternoon that when they broke into the Capitol, it was time for the police to clear the building and arrest those people on the spot. I want to be absolutely clear about that. No equivocation, no delay. That afternoon, that's what leadership requires. You got to be clear, and you cannot put up with the kind of behavior that occurred when they broke into the Capitol. In terms of the folks that work in the Capitol right now, I actually think this is going to sound like apostasy, but you have to figure out how to work with Lorena Gonzalez. She's the most powerful politician in the legislative branch of the Capitol. You have to figure out how to work with her. That's what I do. I mean, everybody on the Democratic side's terrified of her.
And how do you do that?
I call her up, I find out. I sit down and go, Lorena, you know, you got kids, I got kids. You got people in business, I got people in business. How do we work together? Let's find something we can work together on. Same way I did it in Congress.
Mr. Cox, Larry Elder is not here tonight. We invited him. He had a fundraiser and chose not to come. But he has said that he wants the minimum wage to be 0 in this state, that the minimum wage should be 0. Do you agree with that? And do you support the current minimum wage of $15 an hour?
Well, I like Larry. I was on his show a lot in 2018. He said I would be a great governor, for the record. listen, I think there's a place for a minimum wage, but I think he's right from the standpoint that I think the free market is a much better judge of what wages should be. But I think getting back to the problems of this state, we've got too much government and too much regulation. We've got too many times where government has inserted itself into business like that. And, you know, I grew up a Democrat. I became a Republican because Ronald Reagan talked to me about the fact that government's not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. So my message to the Democrats and independents, and by the way, thousands of them signed this recall petition. Let me make that clear. They want a state that works. They want this state fixed. We have elected celebrities and career politicians and insiders for so long. We have not elected a business person who spent a career. I started with nothing, and I built a business that's highly successful. I did it by solving problems every single day. I don't care if it's a Democrat problem or a Democrat answer or a Republican answer. We've got to come together and unite and solve these problems.
So what should the minimum wage be?
You know, that's a question. Right now, it's, what, $12 an hour?
Up to 15.
I think it should be gauged versus other states, but I'd like to see the real true minimum wage. I agree with Larry. It should be zero. It should be set between the employer and the employee.
All right. Thank you, sir. Christine.
All right, so we are all here because we love California. Our friends are here, our families are here. This is a question about preserving our neighborhoods at the same time. Assemblyman Kiley, this is to you. Linda Merkins is a voter who asks, how do you preserve single-family neighborhoods but still increase housing opportunities?
Well, it's a great question because housing is maybe the core issue as to why the American dream is falling apart in California. There was a recent survey that showed that 2/3 of Californians believe that kids growing up in our state today will be worse off than their parents. And it's why more and more people are packing up U-Hauls in order to avoid that fate. Last year, for the first time in California's 170-year history, our population declined. It's truly staggering. You know, this used to be the state where anyone could get ahead. Now it's the state that many can't wait to leave behind. And our soaring housing costs are central to that. Gavin Newsom promised a Marshall Plan on housing, but he has not produced anything of the sort. You know, construction has actually declined, and he's provided about 1/5 of the units that he promised. All the while, we now have a median house price in California that's over $750,000. That's up 20% just in the last year. And so you can get a good job after college, work hard, do everything right, and you not be able to afford a down payment on your home until you're in your 40s. So it's very important to preserve single-family neighborhoods and to allow for local flexibility and local autonomy. But there are simple steps that we could take to increase the supply of housing. We could certainly streamline the permitting process. We could eliminate all of the fees and costs that can be on average $150,000. We can reform CEQA and other litigation traps and do what other states do, where they get projects right off the ground without delay.
Congressman Ossie, I'm going to stick a little bit with that same question about preserving neighborhoods. How do you preserve the single-family neighborhood and increases housing?
So I think the fundamental problem on our existing neighborhoods is that the legislature has gotten itself into a position where they believe they know better what should happen in this or that neighborhood than the local land use authority. So they've started to substitute their judgment through legislative fiat to accomplish their goals in Sacramento, whereas they may not work in, pick a city. My view here is that you have to figure out how to get houses to market in a timely fashion. Let me give you an example. My sisters and I are in the middle of a project for 1,000 acres for 5,000 houses. We're in the 28th year of trying to process through the entitlement process. CEQA needs to be changed so that within the general plan area that a community adopts and which they finalize an EIR on, that within that general plan area, you don't have to have redundant EIRs over and over and over again, as long as the housing project or the commercial project meets the intention of the general plan. This is fundamentally common sense. You cannot layer on time requirements and expect housing to stay affordable.
Mayor Faulkner, I'm going to send this one to you here. This is from Greg Lee, political reporter from KTVU in San Francisco. We already heard on the stage here that the average price of a home is $750,000. A lot of Americans, Californians, can't afford that, so a lot of them are going to rent. Greg Lee points out that rent in San Francisco is the highest in the nation. What do you do about that?
It is too expensive, as we talked about earlier, and Californians are leaving and voting with their feet. And yet what we have seen from Gavin Newsom is nothing. A lot of rhetoric, word salad. He talks a lot about issues, but actually doesn't provide any of the solutions to make a change. It's time for a governor who's actually going to put proposals forward. In San Diego, as mayor, because of all of these regulations, we had to go through a process to do a citywide EIR for 1 year, but we did it for complete communities with one goal. How do we make it easier, faster, more efficient to do what? To actually get units constructed. And now you can do that in San Diego by going over the counter. And we said very clearly, here's where you want the growth and development along our major transit corridors. And just as importantly, here's where you don't, in our single family neighborhoods. And let me just be very direct. When we see some of these pieces of legislation that want to eliminate single family zoning in California, that's wrong. I will veto that. We can put the housing where we want it, along our transit corridors. We can make it easier to construct that housing, and we can have a governor that's actually going to back it up with changes in policies rather than what we're seeing from Gavin Newsom, which is zero.
Mr. Cox, I want to change it up just a little bit about protecting our homes. This is a question for you about wildfires. Our meteorologist in Los Angeles at Fox 11, Rick Dickert, asked about this. He points out last year we broke a record. There are fires burning right now, but last year 10,000 fires, he points out, burning over 4.2 million acres. What would you do differently on California's fire prevention plan that the governor isn't doing now?
Again, another issue that the politicians, celebrities, and insiders have just failed the people of this state. Climate change may or may not be causing these fires, but we've got to deal with them. First of all, we should be doing better forest management. We should be cleaning out the brush and the dead trees. We also then have to get a better suppression response. Right now, we're spending $4 million a day on that train to nowhere that 3 people are going to ride. We need to take that money and get airplanes. There's never been a time when there's more airplanes on the ground not being used. Get an air force of 100 or so planes. The minute smoke is spotted, you send those planes and you stop these fires before they become infernos and out of control. And the last thing would be to revive the timber industry. Again, that's what a businessman would say. We need to get the timber industry. And why? Because we used to have 100 sawmills in the state, and we ran them out of business with regulations. They would clean the forest. They would build fire breaks. They would help make sure that fires were controlled. So we need to apply common sense solutions to this, not just sit and throw up our hands and blame climate change or some other external source. That's what the politicians do. We've got to stop doing this and fix the problem.
Well, I have a ton more questions here. We'll see if we have some time. Right now, I turn it over to the ambassador.
Thank you, Christine. According to FBI Director Christopher Wray, the Chinese Communist Party has taken trillions of dollars in U.S. intellectual property and is currently influencing American policy through donations to universities through front organizations like the Confucius Institutes. Governor DeSantis in Florida just signed legislation to stop this conduct in Florida. Mayor Faulconer, what will you do to defend the UC and Cal State systems from both IP theft but also unlawful foreign political influence, while at the same time protecting the civil rights of our patriotic Chinese-American professors, staff, and students at the universities?
Well, it's about calling it out when it happens, Ambassador, as you well know, and particularly from state-sponsored groups. We absolutely have to protect our IP. We are the most innovative state in the nation. We're proud of that. We have to have a governor that's going to stand up and protect it and call it out when those international bad actors are doing the wrong thing. I will have no problem doing that. And in fact, I spent a lot of time while I was mayor the last year and a half on working to get USMCA across the finish line, because how do we compete with China? It's about North American competitiveness. It's about the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We worked so hard to get that agreement signed because what that's going to mean for us and our ability to compete with China, to be direct. And now we have the benefits of that. And I saw it firsthand as mayor of San Diego, what we can do, and we're working together with all of our trade partners. That's how we compete. We strengthen the rules that allow our small businesses and prime companies to do what they need to do, and we take a firm stand when the bad actors come out and do the right, and don't be afraid to call them out on it. That's, I think, the most important thing.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, what do you say about the Confucius Institutes and this foreign political influence on our university students coming from the Chinese and other foreign governments?
Well, we need to deal with the Communist Chinese Party, and there's no question about it. It's an unaccountable party that controls that country, that feels it's going to control dissent. It censors its people. It tries to control the economy. In other words, it's kind of like Sacramento. We've got to stand up to this. Listen, we want to have a great relationship with every country in the world, but we also have to protect what our businesses have generated in this country. And as the mayor said, California is one of the leaders in developing intellectual property and developing business methods. It's not just intellectual property, it's business methods and markets. We need to make sure that we produce in this country. That's vitally important. We found that out during the pandemic when we found out that we didn't make enough ventilators. We didn't have enough supplies for testing and other things in the pandemic. We need to make sure that we stop chasing business out of the state. That's what the politicians and celebrities and insiders who have controlled this state for too long have been doing to business, not just in California, but around the country. We need to make sure that we have people that are accountable and that we stand up for our business interests.
Thanks. Congressman Ossie, what do we do to protect the UC system and the Cal State system, the gems of our educational program in California? It's what's made our state so great, so competitive. It's why so many innovators live here and come here to study. How do we protect those universities from IP theft and malign activity?
This is actually one of the most interesting questions that our country faces right now. It's not the UC thing I'll get to. CCP, as you know, is engaged in a systematic effort to steal our IP. It's been going on for at least 30 years. They started in agriculture. They've taken our tree technology, our livestock technology, our crop technology, and they've taken it to China, and they've tried to implement it. Right? Henry Kissinger wrote a book in 2011 called On China. It's about this thick, small print, but enlightening. I commend it to you to read if you want to know what the Chinese are up to. In terms of the UC and CSU system, in terms of protecting the ability to continue with the IP, we need to have a very, very strong standard for who ends up owning the IP that comes out. I'm not sure that's a state or a federal issue. I would prefer it be a federal thing for all universities across the country, but we can do it here if we have to, and I would support it. We are at war with China. We're not shooting bullets yet, but we are at war with China. You need to understand that.
Senator Kiley, one of the things that the governor in Florida has done is he said that state universities in Florida cannot contract and cannot enter into agreements across a whole wide variety of areas with China, with Russia, with Cuba, with Venezuela, with Syria, with Iran. Is that something you'd support here for the UC system and for the CSU system as well?
Well, it sounds like something certainly worth looking at. With the UC, it's a little complicated because they're constitutionally independent. The state can't regulate them in the same way that they can the CSUs. But the problem that you bring up is one that I have a great deal of familiarity with. When I was in private practice, I prosecuted the civil case against Huawei Technologies for intellectual property theft. And this is in the public documents in the case. They had stolen this smartphone testing robot from the lab of our client, and then, basically tried to steal the IP. And the Wall Street Journal, in a front-page article a couple years ago, cited our case as the basis for the federal action that followed against Huawei Technology. And so it is a very serious issue, and we need aggressive action of this on the federal level as well as where appropriate at the state level. I'll also add, by the way, that the threats to intellectual property in California don't just come from China. They come from our state legislature as well. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and I see bills every year that erode intellectual property protections because they're trial lawyer-backed bills that seek to create new ways to sue people. This is just one of the many reasons that California is routinely rated the top judicial hellhole in the United States. But on the issue of universities, at the end of the day, I think what we need at our universities is to have a culture of free and open debate instead of them being sort of the sites of censorship that they've become. My first piece of legislation was a resolution to protect freedom of speech at our colleges and universities. It passed the legislature unanimously, but we've only seen backsliding since.
Thank you. Hugh?
Thank you, Ambassador. I have two questions left, so I'll ask two of you each. The first one, I'll ask Assemblyman Kiley to go on. The mask mandate for elementary school children. School begins in 30 days. The Orange County Board of Education sued Governor Newsom to stop any sort of mask mandate in the Orange County Public Schools. What do you believe you could do to stop mask mandates on elementary school kids if you were elected governor in a month?
Well, I'm 100% against a mask mandate at the state level. California is one of only a handful of states that has one, and I think that a lot of the authority to impose that stems from the state of emergency. So I would terminate the state of emergency on day one. Parents know what is best for their kids. They should be making these decisions for themselves. But I'll say as a broader point that California, as I mentioned, is one of only a handful of states that still has this policy. And we've been a national outlier throughout the COVID era. Of all the 50 states, we had the harshest lockdowns. Of all the 50 states, we had the longest school closures. We were the last to open just about everything. And so to make the case that California got it right, you also have to make the case that all 49 other states got it wrong. And that's a case that simply cannot be made on the basis of the data. When you look at education, our kids have fared worse here than anywhere. We've done more harm to them, including lowering their life expectancy, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association. Our unemployment rate has been the second highest in the country throughout the COVID era, and our public health outcomes have actually been among the worst as well when you measure excess mortality. If our excess mortality rate were even on par with the national average, thousands more Californians would be alive today. So I think that the lessons that we need to draw from this, which this governor clearly has not drawn, is that states that took a different approach, that followed the science, that took a balanced approach, and that trusted their citizens did a lot better, and I would learn from them and have that model here in California as governor.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Mayor Faulkner, in the very first round of questions tonight, Christine asked you about mask mandates, and you said you don't support them. Governor Pete Wilson, good friend of the Nixon Library, has told me repeatedly the California Constitution empowers the governor with extraordinary emergency powers. Would you use those powers to mandate that there be no masks required in any public school of elementary schools in California if you win the recall?
Well, I will tell you, I was just like the Assemblyman here, strongly oppose mask mandates in public schools. Our parents are the right ones to make the choices for our kids. And to see what this governor has continued to do with the mandate approach is the wrong approach. And it's time and time again, it's not just on what we're seeing right now, but it's also when we went through last year, open and close, open and close. We had businesses in California that were open and closed 5 and 6 different times. We had a governor that started, remember, whether it was case rates, then it went to color-coded charts, remember those? Then it went to geographic regions that were as big as like the entire state. That's the type of stuff that you lose confidence in Californians to stand up and do the right thing. And so that's why it's not about mandates. It's about
Mayor, I got to
education.
press you on this, though. Will you use your authority to bar mask mandates, not oppose them, but to forbid them?
That's absolutely something I would look into doing here, 100%.
Look into doing or
Yes.
do? Do. Now I want to switch to homelessness for Congressman Ossie and John Cox. Federal District Court Judge David Carter issued an order in May that took authority over homeless spending and programs away from the County of Los Angeles and the City of Los Angeles, citing massive dysfunction that result in more than 60,000 people on the streets in Los Angeles. Now we have the Ninth Circuit considering Judge Carter's order, which has been appealed by both the county and the city. Do you want the Ninth Circuit to uphold the judge's order, which essentially strips the city and the county of authority over their own homeless programs and budget? Mr. Cox.
Well, I'm afraid of the Ninth Circuit most of the time, but I don't necessarily want them to take away local control, but I want Los Angeles to do something about their homeless problem, and that's the problem here. They passed a huge tax increase, as we know, and the money wasn't spent. I met with a gentleman in the real estate business who told me that he had been asked by Mayor Garcetti to actually handle it, and he told me that most of the money hadn't been spent. And you know why? Because the cost of building was outrageous. They were getting quotes of $500,000, $600,000 a door to build homeless units. I build in Indiana for $100,000 a door, and it's not the land cost, it's the regulations and the cost of building. What we've got to do is solve the problem again, and that means we've got to attack the cost of building in the state. We've got to get approvals faster, we've got to reduce the mandates, we've got to reduce the litigation, we've got to speed up the approvals, and then we've got to have the people demand that their officials use the money wisely. I'll tell you what. When I'm the governor of this state, we're going to go after every jurisdiction in California that wastes money. We're going to have full transparency and audits of every agency in every city.
Congressman O.C., the Ninth Circuit is a lot better after President Trump added a number of its appointees. Judge Carter has taken the authority and the money away from the city and county of Los Angeles. The Ninth Circuit is considering whether to leave it with Judge Carter or give it back to the city and county of Los Angeles. What do you want the Ninth Circuit to do?
So I want to go on record here thanking Judge Carter for slapping the elected leaders of L.A. on their performance on this issue. He basically said, you guys are incompetent, I'm taking it away from you. That's what he said. That's the way the system works. That was the message. Now, the city challenged that, and the Ninth's going to look at it. Look, I am just done waiting for somebody's solution on homelessness. 75 to 80% of these people are either drug addicted or mentally ill. There's no shortage of funds at the state or local level. Did you know that currently in the state today, there are 41 separate programs across 9 separate agencies spending $4 billion in the fiscal year ended June 30th to deal with homelessness, and the number just keeps going up. And now Governor Newsom says he's going to triple down on that and make no changes to the approach. Judge Carter did the right thing. He called them out. I'm calling them out today. What we're doing isn't working. We need to change. We need to get treatment for the drug addicted. We need to get treatment for the mentally ill. We need to stop calling failure success and face the facts.
We have less than 10 minutes left in the debate, so the last round of questions will go to Alex Michelson and perhaps time for a closing statement. Alex?
All right, Mr. Cox, as governor, you control appointments. You get a lot of chances to hire and fire people. Who stays and who goes? Who are you looking to fire?
Well, considering the way this government is run, that's a very there's no shortage of people to deal with there. You know, the first thing I'll do as the governor is order an audit of every agency, as well as an evaluation of its worth and its beginnings, as well as what it's actually doing. Caltrans would be one of the first I'd look at. That agency is so mismanaged. It costs twice as much to build a road in California as it does in Texas. That's outrageous. And we all know we're paying the most outrageous gas taxes in the country. That's got to change. We know how bad the EDD is. I mean, that agency should be completely audited, and that management should go. The DMV is another ridiculously managed organization. Many years ago, I lived in Florida. I got my driver's license in 15 minutes. When I came to California 20 years ago or so, it took me 3 hours. 3 hours to get my driver's license. The management of that agency, and I could go on and on. We are going to have, as I would with any business that I turned around, look at every single agency and the management.
Mayor Faulconer, this question from our colleague Carla Marinucci from Politico. As governor, you'd have the power to reverse the Governor Newsom's first-in-the-nation move to expand Medi-Cal to undocumented immigrants that are elderly. Would you do so?
Yeah, that's the wrong approach that the governor took. 100%. We're a very welcoming state. We take care of people. We provide emergency services. But as we continue to layer on cost after cost, you are taking what was meant to be insurance programs and turning them into welfare programs. That's unsustainable. We can't do that. We're kind-hearted in California, but we have to say, here's what we're going to do and here's what we're not going to do. Let me also get back to that last question because I feel very strongly about that. It's time for a whole new team of people in California at all of our agencies. On day one, I will bring in a whole new team of women and men who believe, like I do, about the reforms and the changes that we need to do. The governor actually has about 4,000 appointments. So the folks out there who want to serve our state, now's your time, because we're going to need you. On my very first day as mayor of San Diego, I brought in the first female police chief in the history of San Diego, Chief Shelley Zimmerman, because we had a problem with some very few officers in our department, but we needed leadership and change at the top. I understand how incredibly important that is to the culture, to have men and women that are going to put their all into it, are going to be reform-minded. That's what we need to do at the state of California, and I will do that on day one.
Assemblyman, you are an attorney. As governor, you would have the ability to appoint judges, which are so important to policy in this state. What is your judicial philosophy, and what does a judge look like that you're appointing?
Well, I appoint judges that would uphold the Constitution and would set the parameters for our politics, that would not seek to, participate in our politics. I've gotten a little experience in the courts this last year plus when Assemblymember James Gallagher and I took Governor Newsom to court for abusing his emergency powers. We had seen very early, in the very early stages of COVID-19, that he was using executive powers, emergency powers, in a way that our Constitution does not envision, to actually make policy, to usurp the role of the legislative branch. So we took him to court in June of last year. We represented ourselves, actually, as attorneys, and we won a trial in Sutter County last November, and we're now seeking review by the California Supreme Court in order to uphold a very important principle, which is that we have a separation of powers, we have the rule of law, we have the Constitution, we have checks and balances, and even in an emergency, especially in an emergency, we need to have a representative government. And so we're hoping to get a ruling for the California Supreme Court that will be a very important precedent, that we will never have one-man rule in California again, and I will certainly look to appoint justices, whether at the Supreme Court level or throughout our judiciary, who will be of that mind.
Congressman Ossie, as governor, you have the power to declare states of emergency. Are there any states of emergency that you would declare in that job?
I think the governor's power in this aspect needs to be constrained. I would go to the legislature and voluntarily ask them to put a time limit on the duration of whatever whatever emergency period I might otherwise need to declare prospectively. That's the problem we're dealing with right now, is that there's no time limit on the current California Emergency Management Act that the governor is exercising all of this authority from. So that would be step one. Now, from an executive standpoint, I spoke about this at the outset. We're building water storage, folks. I'm firing the people who are in the way of that. We're keeping criminals in jail. The people who are working with Governor Newsom to change the rules by which criminals can get out of jail early, that's over. Those people are gone, all right? The people at the state forestry department who are standing in the way of timber sales that end up reducing risk in our rural areas for fire, those people are going to have to either change their way or they're retiring. It's just that simple. I'm not going to sit here and belabor, well, how many angels can dance on the head of the pin? We're going to get stuff done.
And let's end with something fun, because if you watch our statewide political show, The Issue Is, we like to do a game called Personal Issues, where we get to know you. There are a lot of people that are just getting to know you tonight. So this is a rapid-fire round. Try to give us like 1 or 2 word answers. We can get through as many of these as we can, all right? So, Mr. Cox, what is something embarrassing your kids would tell us about you?
Oh, boy. That my wife doesn't like my nose hair.
Okay.
Too much information.
Mayor Faulkner, when you're not working, what are you doing for fun?
I love to cycle when I have the time, and I've been a big supporter of the Challenged Athletes Foundation. A shout out to everybody who's watching. They're training for their big ride from San Francisco to San Diego, raising funds for challenged athletes. I love to get out on the bike.
Ambassador Kiley, what's your favorite restaurant in California?
Did I get promoted?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Assemblyman Kiley. Who knows?
Maybe one day. Maybe one day.
I would go with Frank Fat's. It's close to the Capitol, but there's actually 2 offshoots of it in my district. Unbelievably good Chinese food.
You didn't say French Laundry.
Never been. Apparently, I'm one of the few politicians in California who hasn't.
Congressman Ossie, do you have any hidden talents?
Yeah. It's the same talent I wear on my sleeve. I get things done.
Okay. Very nice.
Thank you, Alex. We are out of time, unfortunately, and the dreaded closing statements will not be closing the debate. I do, however, want to thank each of our candidates tonight, John Cox, Kevin Faulkner, Kevin Kiley, and Doug Ossie, for joining us. I also want to thank Ambassador Robert O'Brien for joining us as he co-chairs the Nixon Seminar. We appreciate that greatly, Robert. I'd also ask people who would like additional information on the Nixon Foundation to visit it at nixonfoundation.org or at nixonseminar.com. And my special thanks to Channel 11 and our colleagues, Alex Michelson and Christine Devine. Thank you both.
We just want to say thank you for having us, and to our viewers here. If you've never been here to the Nixon Library Museum, it is worth coming out here with yourself and your families. It's a beautiful property and a beautiful piece of our history here in California. This recall election is something Very interesting during our times. This is the second recall election ever in our state. We thank you for watching, and keep in mind that you'll have the two issues on the ballot when you get that in the mail, voters. Right. And if the recall passes, one of these four men could become governor.
So, if you're interested in more content, our colleague Phil Schuman is headed into the spin room, and you can see more interviews with these candidates at foxla.com/live. We'll have more on the Fox 11 News at 10 o'clock tonight, and on our statewide political show, The Issue Is. And as we go, this crowd has been so respectful, so now's your time to cheer and thank everybody here. This is the time to clap. Thank you all for being fantastic.